we must each become what I call an inverted paranoid. Okay. A paranoid person, the dictionary definition is that a paranoid person is someone who believes that the whole world is conspiring to pull her or him down. Now, if you become an inverted paranoid, it means that you have become a person who believes that the whole world is conspiring to make you successful.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lalit, your host for Networking and Beyond. I'm also the founder of More Than Textbook, where we help children between 5th to 10th standard improve their public speaking and communication skills. Today we have with us a very special person who is also a fellow trainer and has been doing this for over 2 decades. He's the founder of this amazing company called Born to Win, which helps corporates and business accelerate their business and success. He's also one of the senior trainers in BNI. This individual has an amazing personality and has his own charisma when he walks into the room. And some of his training sessions are extremely revered in the BNI fraternity. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our next amazing guest, Mr. Ram Seshu. Mr. Ram Seshu, welcome to Networking and Beyond.
All right.
Okay, that's the COVID punch, is it? Okay, thank you for that. So, sir, it's really nice to have you on this podcast. I don't know if you've done a lot of podcasts before. Well, if this is your first time, how does it feel?
Well, this is not the first time, but it feels great. I mean, I love being here. I love being with you. I think, I admire the way you've set this whole thing up. So, love being here.
Thank you so much, and I think that's a moral boost for me to continue doing this job, and it's a privilege to have you here today, because I personally believe that, I don't know about the listeners, but I have a lot of takeaways from you, and I've had a few conversations before, and you and I come from the same training fraternity, and you've been there, done that, and now I am learning under the shadows of someone like you, and it feels fantastic to have you, sir.
Wonderful. So, let me tell you one thing. Mm-hmm. I think, we're all lifelong learners. Mm-hmm. Okay. So today I've come here with a learning attitude. So yes. I've come to learn. I mean, this is something new, what you're doing and how you're doing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So it's great. So the learning is going to be mutual, I guess, today.
That's great, sir. Learning, like you said, comes from various places, and one of the most primitive places it comes from is family, right? We learn everything, good, bad, we learn from our family. So I want to know, for somebody as successful as you, how did your upbringing start, and what was your family like, back in your childhood days?
Well, we had a very interesting family. I mean, as a family, we've invested very heavily in education, right? Mm-hmm. My great-grandfather was an educationist. The story goes that he was the person who was Sir M. Visvesvarayya's teacher, okay? And my grandfather was an engineer. He was one of the early engineers, and he used to work for the railways, Mysore State Railways. And my grandfather I think my grandfather, more than my grandfather, my grandmother, ensured that all her children got educated very well, Mm-hmm. My dad was an engineer and one of the finest lubrication technologists in this country. Mm-hmm. My aunt's a doctor. And likewise from my mother's side. Mm-hmm. Again, there was a lot of emphasis on education. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the enduring values that I picked up in childhood from the family and the way we were structured was very clearly that, look, never ever think you can't do anything in life. There's just nothing that you can't do. You can do anything, should you put your mind to that. So that was something that, kind of got ingrained, not only in me, but my sisters, mm-hmm. at a very early, very young age.
That's nice. And I think that's a big part of the infinite mindset as well, right? Like you have the belief to do anything and everything, and you put your mind to it, it's possible. But again, for a family that's so encouraging, I'm pretty sure every coin has two sides of it. And no matter how much the encouragement, you would have fought your own demons and your own struggles. Did you have any struggles growing up?
Oh, lots, Lalit, lots. Um, let me make a confession to you. Okay.
Okay.
I have been a serial failure.
Okay.
Okay. So it's very interesting, isn't it? I run Born to Win, but actually I used to fail a lot when I was a kid. So somehow I never liked academics. Somehow, I really don't know why. I've just not been able to figure out what went wrong where. But I didn't like to study. I was one of those kids who just didn't like to study, and I'm hoping that some of the guys who are watching today will empathize with that. And I used to fail. So I failed in seventh, and then I had to shift school, and then those days we had 11 years of schooling. We had 6 subjects, and I failed in physics. I passed in the other 5, so I got through that exam. When I came to Bangalore, I was doing BSc, and the university found that out, and they threw me out of BSc. And so yeah, I mean, growing up was quite challenging from an academics perspective. Okay, excelled in some of the other areas, but from academics didn't do well at all. Okay, so yeah, that was a demon that haunted me for a long time. That maybe I'm just not good enough, and maybe I'm not, I'm not cut out for anything else. So while this feeling of I can was very strong, it just wasn't getting expressed from a academic perspective.
And I'm pretty sure a lot of entrepreneurs today can relate to this story, because entrepreneurs are more, they have a lot of people skills, they're spoken, but need not be really good in academics. And I think I come from the same background, and I feel validated when I see somebody like you, because I was terrible in academics, and today I'm so happy that I'm also a teacher.
Sure. But I must tell you one thing. This situation kind of continued for a long time till I went to Mumbai to do my master's. And I did my master's in economics and econometrics. And in the final year of my master's, I remember my father, one of my professors, and the person I was seeing then, my wife now, they kind of, got me to reconnect with that whole feeling that, I can do anything that I want to do. And I remember from someone who, I wouldn't say hated, I think hated is too strong a word, but who didn't do well in academics. In my final year of the master's, I got back to academics with a vengeance. I understood the system, okay? And I actually maxed that entire year. So much so that in my master's, overall I got a first class.
Wow.
And that was the only first class in my life.
And the last one.
The last one.
That's nice. That's nice. Sir, like you spoke about how you had people around you supporting you to really get there. Speaking of support, who are the most influential people in your life who've paved the way for you to do that? You did speak about your great-grandfather and your grandfather, but people who've been there with you during these times.
Undoubtedly my father.
Father.
Okay. He was, is, and continues to be my hero. Unfortunately, he passed on in 2011. Okay. But without a trace of doubt, it was my father who was my hero. There's no doubt about that. My mother was also a great influence on me. Okay. In her own way, she kind of, surrounded me with love and kind of encouraged me. My wife, who's again been a great influencer, in the sense that lots to learn from her in terms of, perseverance, in terms of focus. So, yeah, I mean, and now my daughter, I think, I'm amazed at, she's a creative director.
Okay.
She works in an advertising agency. And I love her work ethic, So I think, if you adopt an attitude that I am going to learn from every person that I met in my life, then you're bound to have a lot of people coming in your life ready to share, their stuff with you.
True. And like you said, learning is so important, and we have multiple sources. One can be the people around us. And for some of us, we might not be as lucky to have people. But I think you had the fortune of having people and a habit of reading. And I remember talking on the phone call, and you said, I absolutely love reading. But I want to listen to the oxymoron kind of situation where you said you weren't good with books in terms of studies, but you developed the habit of reading. How did this habit come about, and how did that go?
You know, I didn't like academics, period.
Okay.
Right? But it's not to say that I didn't like the habit of reading.
Okay.
Okay. So, like all young people, I mean, you know, Dad used to encourage us to read a very, very eclectic group of, eclectic stuff. So, I started with Billy Bunter, and then Beagles, and then the Enid Blytons, and the Hardy Boys, and whatever, that usual stuff. And then graduated to the westerns, J.T. Edson, Louis L'Amour, and then Earl Stanley Gardner, P.G. Wodehouse. But what would happen is that along the way, I think I realized that the more eclectic your reading habits are, the more interesting life can be. So I must tell you something interesting. I read 3 books at the same time.
Okay.
Right? It's
Reading one is hard
absolutely.
for me.
It's a crazy habit, right? But at any given point of time, I'm reading 1 book on philosophy. Okay? So there's something that I'm reading about philosophy and trying to figure out, what the author is trying to tell us. Then I'm reading 1 complete trash, total, absolute pulp, nonsense that you can pick up in the market, right? And I love doing that, right? And then I'm reading 1 about some life, about the life of somebody, and if not an autobiography, at least a biography, about somebody, because I'm curious, I'm interested in knowing their struggles in life. So at this point of time, I'm reading one of my favorite people in life, Mahatma Gandhi. I'm reading My Experiments with Truth. I think I must be doing this now for the, I don't know how many nth time. Okay? So like that, you keep reading a lot, okay? Because it helps bring your own thought processes in place.
So, from all the books that you've read, in the thousands, I remember asking you this question on call. Which one of these books are your go-to books, and it's ranked number 1? And without hesitation, you said it was the Bhagavad Gita. Now, I know it's a very religious book, and somebody from my generation wouldn't think of making that their go-to book or rank number 1 book. Why do you consider that as the go-to book?
First of all, let's understand a couple of things. Okay? The Bhagavad Gita as a treatise, okay, if you go by all the scientific dating evidence, and if you accept that, is anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 years old, at least 5,000 years old. Organized religion happened sometime in 2,000 years ago. So, first and foremost, we've got to understand that Sanatana Dharma, which is our Dharma, is more than 10, 15, 20,000 years old. Okay? Sanatana Dharma is nothing but the way of life. So let's not confuse the Bhagavad Gita and say it is a religious text. That has been my lifetime's endeavor, saying that, look, it is not a religious text. It has a lot of religion. You can interpret it that.
Correct.
But the Bhagavad Gita is a timeless classic which gives you a direction, which gives you an answer to any of the questions that you have at any point of time. Okay? It is a conversation very much like this between Krishna and Arjuna with an observer, Sanjaya, who's fortunate to observe the entire conversation because he's replaying it to Dhritarashtra. But it is a conversation. It is so many questions that are there in Arjuna's mind that Krishna is answering. Okay? And therefore, the Bhagavad Gita as my go-to book, it's been my go-to book for the last 22 years. And primarily because of this reason. Okay? That whenever I have had a question on any of the aspects of my life, whether it is my career, whether it is my family, whether it is a passion, whether it is an interest, any aspect of my life, okay? And when you read the Gita, you instantaneously get a certain framework of an answer.
Correct.
See, at the core of the Gita, there are some very, very interesting teachings which make it so relevant to today. One of the core teachings of the Gita is Krishna keeps telling Arjuna that you must be in a position to handle what I call the play of opposites. Okay? Pleasure and pain, hot and cold, And he keeps telling Arjuna about the need for each one of us to handle opposites in life. Now, how is it relevant to today? And how is it relevant to, your generation or even the generation after yours? When we do something in life, okay, you will either meet with complete success or with partial success or with no success. That's bound to happen, right? Whatever you want to do in life, one of these three things can be a possible outcome of what you do. If you meet with complete success, then obviously there are people around you who are going to be praising you to the sky and saying that, wow, you're the greatest thing on earth. I mean, you get a first class, you get a first rank, you get 90%, you get 98%, you crack a good deal, you make a good presentation, your client gives you a great testimonial. Whatever it is, you get, fabulous. Now, supposing the opposite happens, and for some reason, you don't apply yourself enough, and you don't get those grades, or you don't get those marks, or you don't get the result that you're expecting, or you don't get that client, or you don't sign up that contract, or whatever happens, it's bound to happen, right? Now, in the first case, you can get carried away in life and say that, I'm the greatest on earth. And in the second case, you can turn around and say, I am the most useless person on earth. Both are not true, right?
Correct.
You are what you are. You are a fabulous creation. You've got everything going for you, right? And that's the Gita. Correct. The essence of the Gita is that, saying that, look, this play of opposites, don't get carried away. Okay? Take this along with that.
Correct.
Right? So he talks of a very interesting concept, and he talks about many things, but one of the things that he talks about is to be a sthita prajna, which means don't get influenced by this or that. Both are not permanent in life. You are. Your capabilities are. Right? And that is why the Bhagavad Gita is my go-to book. And what I tell people is that, look, pick up a copy of the Gita, whichever one you want. Go to the Ramakrishna Mission, go to Chinmaya Mission, go to any of these places, go to Gita Press, Gorakhpur. Pick any one and start.
That's fantastic. And I think there was a great insight for everybody who has any sort of opinion on the Gita to pick it up and look at it not from a religious point of view, like you said, but look at it from a story point of view.
Absolutely.
What moral can you take away from that? Don't get engrossed in the character, the emotion in itself, but the value that it's trying to provide. And I think that will be the greatest takeaway for us.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. So speaking of influence, today you're in the training industry, but people don't know, I don't know how many people do, but that you had started from a different field. And one of your first stints was in an ad agency. And how did that initial part of your career, like as soon as your graduation finished, how was the next decade like? What happened with your jobs? Where did you go? What happened?
So I passed out in 1982. And like all good people those days that did their masters, I too got into academics because you wanted to do something there. And I realized that I'm not cut out for formal teaching. Okay. And that's when I went and joined a company called Crompton Greaves. And that was the first time that I got into marketing and research and stuff like that. And while I was with Crompton and I was working with them, I got an opportunity to work in an ad agency.
Okay.
And What the hell? So one of the reasons why I joined advertising is somebody said that advertising will be full of young models, and you're going to be working with some of the prettiest people on earth, and so what the hell? And you get paid, to have fun. So that's why I said, all right, let me go and see what happens in advertising. Let me work there for a year or two, and then see what happens. And this is Mumbai, 1983-84. So you can imagine, Bombay was a great place to be in, and good fun. But advertising is not, very quickly I realized that, what the world feels and what actually happens is completely different. It's one of the most demanding fields that you can work in, very challenging. You've got to come up with solutions on the fly, you've got to think on your feet, because you are responsible not only for the brands that you're working on, but to the consumers who consume those brands, those products or services. You've got a duty towards them, and to the company that owns those brands, and then to your own agency and to yourself. So it's a very, very demanding, challenging field. So I was fortunate that I was in advertising. I just entered it purely for those kinds of reasons, but then stuck on, did reasonably well. Worked in Bombay, and then very briefly in Hyderabad, and then back to Bombay. So 1 year turned to 2, 2 turned to 3, and 3 turned to 22. So that was a longish stint there. Yeah.
Sir, and you also told me that from there you moved on to this other place called Ma.
Ma is also an ad agency.
Okay.
Also an advertising agency.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here again, in Ma, was there any success story that you had? Or why didn't you remain there? Or was it some thought that was driving you from there?
Not really. I think, I had a very, very good stint at Ma, M.A. Bozell, as it is known. And I was in Hyderabad. We managed to grow that business in Hyderabad from a couple of tens of lakhs to crores. And then I moved to Bombay. I started a healthcare communications company for Ma. That did very well. And at one time, every single major pharma company was our client.
Wow.
And done very well. And mind you, I'm an art student. I'm not a science student. So I had to learn everything about chemistry and botany and anatomy and everything there. So that was a good stint. Then I came back to Bangalore very briefly with Ma here. And then I decided, it's time to do something else.
Sir, now you said you were there for over 20 odd years, right? Now that I know you're a trainer, where did this transition come about? What was that bulb, that went off and said, hey, this is something that you can really do and pursue? So,
Dipti and I started researching behavior, attitudes, sometime in 1988 or 89. And it was purely one, conversation piece, one interest area. There was no formal learning, research, etc., etc. It was just something that we kept reading. We were in Hyderabad, and ASCII was a client of mine, so we used to go there, take some books, and we used to read that. And then, fortunately, I joined an organization called Roundtable, and Roundtable is a organization of young leaders. And they needed a program on leadership and on grooming their people, and so that's how we got into that. And she was involved with the ladies wing of Roundtable called Ladies Circle. So both of us in Roundtable and Ladies Circle started writing programs and trying stuff out just to make it interesting. But this was a passion that continued. Now we both have been very interested in working with children. With young children. And therefore we wrote programs for young children, which we used to go to schools and colleges and run it for them. And it was just a passion. But then I think somewhere by 1998 or 99, while I was at the peak of my advertising career, that was the time that I thought that there is an interesting opportunity, in doing something which was primarily informal on a more formal basis. Because I realized that the corporate world at that time was suddenly going through a huge boom. You know,
The IT sector.
Manmohan Singh's reforms had kicked in. Corporates were accessing markets for capital. You know, earlier that was very difficult to do so, and therefore there was a huge challenge at that time for most corporates. Okay, that you could go to the market, you could raise money, capital was available, the laws were dismantled, which means the license raj was slowly going away, and you could increase your manufacturing capacities. So many things. But then I realized at that time that the mindset of the people who were working in these large organizations was still caught in the 70s and the 80s mindset and not in the opportunity or the abundance mindset. Okay? And that's when I said, maybe there is an opportunity here, that can we do something on a formal basis? And that's how one got into that. It got into this specific area of, attitude transformation, mindset change, etc.
It's fantastic, sir. So, again, I think there was a great inspiration behind this. But one thing that we must truly understand is that it's not easy to make that switch, isn't it? At least for about 2.5 decades, you've been, working and you've been doing quite well. But even though you were passionate about this and you moved on to the business side of it, was it hard for you in any way? Because I'm assuming it would have been hard.
Very. Once I took this call, it took me 3 years to convince myself to leave my very comfortable, well-paid job in Bombay. And even when I started Born to Win, after starting Born to Win, and there were days and days and days when I used to stare at the phone saying, for God's sake, why don't you ring? Why doesn't somebody reply to my call? Why don't they return my call? Why don't they say, no, we're not interested in your services? But why are you keeping me hanging around? And so that's a very challenging time, when you question yourself and you question your commitment to what you want to do, and it's not easy, right? So yes, that was a very, very challenging time, but I was convinced that it's an interesting idea. Mm-hmm. And even after we started Born to Win in 2003, for 1 year we had no customers.
Okay.
So, one of the things that I'd really like to mention to everybody here is this, that look, it's very easy today to look at Ram Seshu or to look at Dipti or to look at Born to Win and say that, wow, look at this organization, it's such a great organization, it's become, it's so big and it's doing so much work and 100,000 people, etc., 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 etc. Okay? But it is a lot of hard work. Okay? And mind you, 1 year, no income, you're just dipping into your personal savings. So, Lalit, let me tell you, I've traveled by BMTC bus. Okay, I didn't want to waste money on petrol. I didn't have a car. I used to use my dad's car. From a situation where I used to have 2 cars, chauffeur-driven cars in Bombay, one for me and one for my wife. And then suddenly it's. I don't mean to make it sound very romantic, mm-hmm. Okay, but it is very, very difficult work. I used to work out of hotel lobbies. There are 4 or 5 hotels in Bangalore. I used to work out of those lobbies, right? And as a trade-off, I used to go and tell the general manager, saying, why don't I train your guys, in terms of service, in terms of what service is all about, and you allow me to use your lobby, And the lobby was a great place because I used to sit there and, they had a good washroom. And that gave me a chance to go and wear on a tie and, take out my jacket and then go meet a client and make a presentation to them saying, this is what I want to do. So yeah, you go through those days of struggle and then you reach here.
Correct. So, every step is one step closer towards where you want to be. But the most important thing is to have that conviction that you can truly make it. Yeah. So, sir, speaking of that, yes, you started Born to Win. The first few years were a bit of struggle. Then how did the market start responding? What was the kind of business plan that you started implementing into Born to Win, and where did the flowers start, budding?
I think the first thing that we did was, I had, a lot of people told me, why don't you create Ramsey Shoe Incorporated?
Like a personal brand.
Yeah. And I said, no, I want to build an institution, and that's going to be called Born to Win. So that was one. And the second thing that we did was that we built a great team. Even now I have one of the most amazing teams that work with me across the country. Okay. And it was a lot of hard work. So there are three kinds of need that you work with. One is what is known as a felt need, the second is a dormant need, and the third is a created need. And we're in the created need business. So it's a lot of hard work going and convincing someone that, look, this is a need that they have, and this need can be answered by us. And to actually go and demonstrate and deliver those results that we are promising people that we will. Okay, because there was quite nothing like this in the market at that time. Okay, when we're talking in terms of spaced engagement programs, when we're talking about experiential learning,
if I might intervene and just ask you one thing,
please.
What made these programs stand out? Like, I'm pretty sure there were other programs also running.
What made this particular program stand out is, my own experience of being in business for a long time.
Correct.
So I have been a CEO myself. I've been the president of a company myself. So when I would talk to a CEO or when I would talk to a president of a company, I kind of empathized and understood the challenges that the president of a company or the CEO of a company goes through. Okay. I was answerable to my board. I was answerable to my investors. So I know what that means, right? And therefore, when I would go and speak to them and tell them that, look, you know what we'll do for you? We will deliver this particular result. So many of those guys used to ask, okay, so what if you don't? I said, then don't pay me. Don't pay me. What if I do? Will you give me a success fee? And a number of those guys actually turned around and said, sure, we'll give you a success fee.
Wow.
And once we started delivering the results, once my team of facilitators and designers started delivering results, then it just kept, becoming bigger and then bigger and then bigger. And then, and today we are at a stage where 80-85% of our business is repeat business or referral business, So
that's really nice, sir. And I think, when you talk about your clients and, the kind of experiences you've had, which pops up the next question, who are these guys? What are the kind of clients that you deal with? And in the last 1 decade or 2 decades, who are your clients and who do you deal with?
So we've dealt, very early, I decided to de-risk the business. So what I consciously did is that me and my team, what we consciously did is that we said we will not become specialists in a particular area. Okay? We will have a very, very eclectic group of clients. So today we work with the largest PSUs. We work with large MNCs. We work with large Indian companies. We work with the retail sector. We work with the automobile sector. We work with the insurance sector. We work with banks. So, whether it is the type of company, we work with tiny companies, we work with retail companies, okay? We work with entrepreneurs, okay? My current passion now is to help, 5 different kinds of entrepreneurs, whether it is a second generation entrepreneur like you, or whether it is a women entrepreneur who's, wanting to break the glass ceiling and, express herself, or whether it is, mature entrepreneurs, people who've been in business for 30, 40 years and are wondering now what do we do next, or whether it is a professional who's turned an entrepreneur like I did when I was 41, 42 years ago, or whether it is a startup, somebody who wants to do. So all of these are people that we work with right now, See, ultimately, our deliverable is a very simple deliverable. Can you develop the confidence that in yourself and your team, that you can actually go and implement your plans and achieve what you want to achieve. So this has been, there's been a very happy journey.
That's great, sir. And in this journey, I truly believe that whoever you're helping comes from a place of spirituality. You know, I really feel that giving is a spiritual process, because we have enough takers in the world. But when you're into the training industry, apart from the business side of it, you really want to help somebody, right? You really want to add value to that person's life, irrespective of the number at the end of the day. You really want to drive that. Where did that feeling come from? Where did that spirituality of being a giver, a trainer, or a pillar of support for the people around you come from?
In the Vedas, it is written, there are two very interesting statements. One is that the greatest sin a man can commit, man, woman, is to carry his knowledge to the grave. Okay? So the corollary to that is that the greatest, punya that a guy can earn is to share his knowledge. Right? And if you can share your knowledge without any expectation, right? And if you can give of your knowledge fully, that is satisfaction in itself. Absolutely. So today, across the country, there are so many people that we've helped, and you feel very grateful that we have had an opportunity to do so. Right? Yes, we've charged them money because you shouldn't give anything away free, for free. But other than that, the fact that they've done well, okay, that they are able to implement their plans, that they're able to go and do what they want to do, I think is a great testimony that somewhere our thought process was right.
Absolutely, and I'm with you on that, because just these 2-3 years of my journey of being a trainer, I've understood one thing, that eaters usually eat well, but feeders sleep well, and that's truly a feeling that even money can't buy. And I think especially in the fields that we are doing, spirituality comes tied and intertwined into that. Yes, sir. So moving on. What kind of practice do you have if you practice spirituality? Because it just doesn't come that way, right? One can be your training where you give. Apart from that, do you have any practices that you do for spirituality?
Look, each of us, I personally believe, and this is where Born to Win comes from, the name of the company. Each of us is born with a certain purpose in life. If you have been born, then there is a certain reason why you have been put here. Okay? Now, some of us, and this is what I call your swadharma, okay, your higher purpose in life. Okay? Now, some of us are able to discover it early. Some of us take time, and some of us unfortunately don't. Okay? So that's part of life. But if you're able to figure out what is your swadharma, what is the higher purpose of your life, and you start working on actualizing that, okay, then what you're doing is that you are making sure that you are well on that path of spirituality. What is the meaning of your swadharma? Your swadharma is very simple. Okay, to do, according to me, my definition of swadharma, to do what makes you truly, genuinely happy while ensuring that there is nobody who is unhappy by what you do, is your swadharma. Okay? In other words, to do what truly makes you happy, genuinely happy, and in the process, if you can ensure that it also makes the whole world or all those that you interact with, if you make them also genuinely happy, then it is the highest form of swadharma that you can get to.
Fantastic.
So you move from a neutral position, which is don't make anybody else unhappy, to a situation where can you help others become happy? Right? Genuinely happy. Now that is really, really, really a fabulous canvas. So in that process, you obviously are going to do what makes you happy, what makes the world happy. And that is spirituality at the end of it, right?
Correct. And I mean, so beautifully put. But if you take the same puzzle of spirituality that you just said and add the layer of your business, I think it forms the principle of ikigai, which is, you know, to have all the four hemispheres of liking what you do, being good at it, and making sure you make money, and at the end of the day, making sure the world is also benefiting from you or whatever your passion is. And I think, you know, it's great to hear from someone like you, and it gives me a lot more confidence to strive towards doing my job, and in every possible way, right? Sir, moving on, I have my last two questions. You've been a big part of BNI. How has BNI really impacted your life, and what's the ultimate learning from BNI that you've had?
I think the biggest learning from BNI is obviously givers gain. There's no doubt about that. So BNI has been, BNI came to my life at a very interesting point about 8 years ago. And I joined this absolutely wonderful, wonderful chapter called Odyssey. And we managed to curate Odyssey and make it into a curated chapter. We're now 56 people. We have a fabulous mix of very senior, mature businessmen, second generation businessmen, and startups. So there's a tremendous amount of energy, there's a tremendous amount of experience, there's a tremendous amount of maturity. Right from day one in Odyssey, our focus was that, look, we need to help others generate business for each other. So we've done about 216 or 218 odd crores in the last 9 years. And that's a great thing for us, okay, as a chapter, right? So the biggest benefit, givers gain, no doubt about that. That philosophy is a phenomenal philosophy, and it fit in very well with my own philosophy.
100%.
The second great thing that happened in BNI is that I have invested and I've benefited from some of the most amazing relationships that I've managed to create in Odyssey, in the region. Okay, some of my best friends today, I'm very happy to say, are from BNI. Okay, people who are very genuine, people who are out there to help you. Okay, in any which way that you want. So giving back to BNI is a pleasure. And now I'm working on this whole concept of PPR and the Power Buddy.
Yes.
And trying to figure out how I can help each and every member of the Bangalore region, and hopefully one day even a larger region, a larger country, even BNI across the country, if I can, in trying to figure out how can you actually go and achieve the potential possible revenue that you should be getting through your membership in your chapter.
Correct. I had the privilege of sitting in one of those seminars recently, the PPR seminar. It's a part of the LTRT exercise, and without hesitation, I knew you were the one who was going to do it, and I think it was a great point of conversation. And today, I'm glad I was able to get you on this podcast. So, one last question before we move on to the final segment. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years?
Lalit, I'll be 60 on the 13th of this month. In 5 years' time, I am now working on 3 projects. I'm an ideas man. I'm an implementer. By now, you realize that I can't kind of sit down twiddling my thumbs. So one project that I'm working on right now is that I am working on creating 1 million enlightened entrepreneurs in India. And I'm doing it through the Shakti-based model, which is to align Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti, and Manas Shakti. So that's one. The second is that I'm working on getting the Bhagavad Gita to as large an audience as possible, and today's audience, tomorrow's audience, and trying to figure out how can we make it relevant to today's requirements and today's needs. So in that, I've started talking about it, and 2 of my books should be published very soon. They're in the process of being written. So that's the second project that I'm working on. And the third project that I'm very passionate about and that I'm working on is how do we empower young children? We're already doing some great work through Rotary on that. Okay, how do we get young children to start believing in their own potential as winners, and how do we get them to express their dreams? So before this pandemic, of course, thanks to Rotary and Roundtable and Ladies Circle and Innerwheel, we would impact anywhere between 20 to 25,000 children every year in government schools.
Wow.
And now I want to take that further. So I'm working with some organizations right now in terms of figuring out how can we actually multiply manifold the impact of that program. So these are three things that I'm working on right now.
That's fantastic, sir. And thank you so much for every single answer that I got, because I feel it had your own unique sense of flavor, and it came from the experienced side of you in terms of everything, life, BNI, and business. A lot of takeaways for the listeners, and I'm so glad that you were here for this segment.
Pleasure.
Let's quickly move on to the next segment, which is the rapid fire segment. And here we're going to see, we're going to let loose, and we're going to understand the person, Ram Seshu, today.
So do I get a hamper or something at the end of this? You're now talking like
Karan Johar.
Karan Johar. Do I get a do I get a hamper, or do I get a gift or something if I scored well?
Yes, well, I'm pretty sure you will score well, and we've got a gift ready for you. And we'll see how you'll score with the 12-14 questions we have.
Shoot away.
Okay, my first question is, what motivates you to get out of bed every single morning?
I love going for a walk.
Okay. So the walk is your motivation. Name another business profession you wouldn't mind getting into.
Once I finish these three projects, I'm going to open a kitchen.
Wow. Cooking.
Absolutely. I'm going to open a kitchen, and I'm going to open a different kind of a kitchen. A kitchen which will have at least 40 to 50 branches in every city. So it's a different kind of a kitchen idea that I have.
I'm quite intrigued. I want to know more about that one. Name 3 business leaders you would want to have a discussion over dinner.
One obviously would be, without a doubt, Ratan Tata.
Okay,
because I love the humility, the compassion that he brings to everything that he does. Okay, certainly love to have dinner with him. I'd certainly love to have dinner with Mukesh Ambani. Okay, because I love his his focus and this ability to be completely relentless in pursuing what he does. I'd love to spend time with him and learn from him. Okay, that's another person that I'd love to do so. And the third person that I'd really like to do, I'd like to have dinner with would be, if I can, drop in at a dinner with Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, because I love how they're convincing the world to give their wealth for a cause, and I'd really love to learn from them as to how do they motivate people to do so, and what is it that they're doing.
Fantastic. If you were given $1 million, what would you do with it?
Give it away.
Give it away. Fantastic. Charity? Oh, give it away to like what?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
I'd love to give it away to building capacity.
If you were given a watermelon, what would you do with it?
What would I do with it? I'd first of all, carve some face on the watermelon, like a pumpkin. Okay, and give it to kids to have fun with it.
That's nice. So showing your creative knife skills, huh? What are some of the most inspirational books or videos that you can recommend? Definitely apart from the Bhagavad Gita, because it's got a whole question and segment about it. Yeah.
I would definitely urge people to read Mahatma Gandhi and his, my experiments with truth. Mahatma Gandhi is unfortunately not very well understood by a lot of people, but I think he's a phenomenal thinker. Amazing, book. That's one. The second book that I would like people to read, if you can pick a copy of it, it's something that I read regularly. It's called 100 Great Lives.
Okay.
Okay, it's a phenomenal book again. Read the 100 Great Lives, because it's a fantastic book to read about people who we've forgotten in time. It's a very beautifully curated book. I don't know where it's available. I've been looking for it to present it to a couple of people. That's another thing that I'd certainly like you to read. And the third, if you have the time, if you're a member of BNI, if you can hear Ivan Meisner's podcasts, okay, I think they're again phenomenal. I love the simplicity of the message, the way he puts it across, the passion that he has for it. He's another guy that
I love the warmth that he speaks with, and it's like a nice warm hug that you get, and it helps you open up all the thoughts that you have in your head.
Sure.
Okay, now moving on. I know you're writing books. You just mentioned it in the podcast, but if you authored a book, let's say a new one right now, what would you name it?
Getting out of the mediocrity trap. I think we should stop being mediocre people. Yeah.
True. I'm with you on that one. What's the best advice you've ever got?
Best advice that I got was from my father. Don't be unjust to your own potential that you have. And he told me this years ago, and he said, look, I know that you're very gifted and you are not doing justice to your potential. Don't be unjust to yourself.
That's nice. You've also been a part of a lot of communities, right? You're a part of Rotary, you're a part of BNI. I don't know, these are the two that I know. What community would you recommend, and what's been your favorite by far?
Well, if you're somewhere in your 30s, then I would certainly recommend without hesitation that you join an organization called Roundtable. Okay. I think it's one of the finest organizations that you can think of, Roundtable, out of experience. If you, for some reason, can't join Roundtable, then I would certainly like to recommend that you join an organization called JAYCES, because that's another great organization to join.
Is there a full form for that?
JAYCEE. It's called Junior Chambers. Okay, JAYCES is another great organization. Of course, if you're below 30, between 18 to 30, then I would certainly advise you to join Rotract. Okay, that's another great organization to join, Rotract. That's there. A little older, do come to Rotary. If you're 40 at that age, Rotary is a great organization to be in.
That's great. What kind of a person are you? Coffee or a tea person?
Tea.
Tea. Lemon tea or chai?
I'm very, over the years you pick up some crazy habits. So I am an Earl Grey man.
Okay.
And so wherever I go, I will carry my own Earl Grey. I will have only Earl Grey.
That's nice. Indoor or outdoor sports?
Outdoor.
Outdoor sports. Okay, one last question. If you could teach one subject in school, what would it be?
I would teach mathematics.
Okay.
Or Hindi.
Okay.
Because I used to fail in those subjects.
Nice. Okay. Well, I think I hope I get that vision one day, because I hated mathematics myself and I'd never want to teach it to anybody.
Yeah. I think I'll make a good teacher, because I'll make both maths and Hindi extremely interesting.
That's really nice, and it's nice to know that you've come that whole circle of saying, hey, I hate this now, and now I can teach this as well. That speaks of your experience, that speaks of who you are as an individual. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you here. And I, for one, can vouch for the listeners and say that we have multiple takeaways from this podcast. I think, to even summarize that in about 3 to 4 points, I am doing some sort of injustice, I feel. But if I have to give away to the listeners, let's say about 3 to 4 lines of summary. The first one is about doing anything that you want and doing it with absolute conviction and belief. And if you do it, it's definitely going to happen. And that's my first takeaway from your journey. My second takeaway is that you must be able to handle both the opposites, like both the sides of the polarity, right? North and south, like you said, hot, spicy, and something sweet. The ability to juggle between the two will also make you ready for life. And that's my second takeaway. My third one is, no matter how hard the journey gets, one thing is that if you are harder, there's nothing to stop you and you can always keep going. I think that's an amazing takeaway that I can get, because again, in your business career, you never had that and you moved. So yeah, ultimately, I think everybody is born with a purpose, and to truly fulfill that purpose and come out of mediocrity is something I could take away from your rapid fire. And thank you so much one more time. I'm pretty sure there are so many other things that I'd love to ask you, and I'm going to do this right after the podcast. So thank you so much for being here, and it's been a pleasure to have you, sir.
Absolutely. And I must say, it's been an extremely enjoyable talk. I've thoroughly enjoyed being here with you. And yeah, I think, you've captured whatever we chatted about beautifully. Okay. My last thing that I'd like to share with you is this, that, we must each become what I call an inverted paranoid. Okay. A paranoid person, the dictionary definition is that a paranoid person is someone who believes that the whole world is conspiring to pull her or him down. Now, if you become an inverted paranoid, it means that you have become a person who believes that the whole world is conspiring to make you successful. And therefore, when you start believing in that, and when you start going out into the world with that feeling, you will start meeting people like that. And then you will build a whole ecosystem. You will build a whole world on your terms and conditions.
Yes, sir.
Very enjoyable being here, Lalit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you one more time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've had an amazing time watching this wonderful episode. If you like content like this, please make sure that you subscribe, like our channels, and drop down in our comments below. Share your opinions, and we love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much. Keep watching. All the love in the world. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.